Discernment is only possible because discernment is essentially a relationship with God. Discernment is only possible where there's a life of prayer. Now, that life of prayer has to be filtered through, the nuances of one's vocation. A mother with 3 young children is in a different situation from a woman whose children are all, married and on their own. But we've got to pray. I remember a woman came to me once and wanted help with discernment. And I just asked her, about her prayer. And there really wasn't too much formal prayer. And so I asked her, would you be willing to spend 20 minutes a day in prayer? But then we had something to work with. So prayer and the life of the sacraments, all of that's the substratum that permits discernment. Now here's what Ignatius came to see. If you pray frequently, regularly, faithfully, and secondly, if you are attentive to what's going on in your heart and your thoughts as you're praying, you can come to see where God's will is in the choice. So what the guide...
Be attentive to what's happening inside of you while you pray.
Exactly. Let's go back to Ignatius' own experience, how all this got started.
Yeah.
So he has been very far from God until the age of 30. It's an Augustine story. And then he's wounded in battle, and he has a long...
cannonball, right?
Cannonball shatters his right leg. There are 3 surgeries, and after the 3rd surgery, he has 5 more months before he can use his leg.
Wow.
So he asks for reading. He has in mind the sort of novels of chivalry and romance and so forth that he was used to. But his sister-in-law gives him the only book she has. One is a life of meditations on the life of Christ, and the other a volume with lives of the saints. Ignatius begins, somewhat unwillingly, but he begins to read. 2 things start to happen. He spends hours and hours, he says sometimes up to 2, 3, 4 hours, exploring, pondering in his heart how he's going to win the heart of a woman. He never names her. In all likelihood, this was the Catherine, the younger daughter, the younger sister of the King of Spain. Ignatius might have seen her on a couple of occasions earlier.
So wildly unrealistic.
Completely, because he's never even going to have access to meet her. Yeah. But he gets thoroughly engaged in it, there's energy in it, and hours get spent like this. Now he's reading about Saints Dominic, Francis, another kind of heroism. Now he's starting to spend hours thinking about, well, what if I were to pursue that way? And what he notices finally is this. Both sets of thoughts, while I'm actually thinking about them, let's call it the worldly project and the holy project, they're both engaging. They awaken energy and enthusiasm. But he now notices that after he sets them aside and goes on with the day in the one case and the other, the first set of thoughts about the worldly pursuit leave him empty, unhappy. His heart isn't nourished. There's some trouble there. Whereas when he's been thinking about living like the saints and goes on with the day, his heart always remains happy and content. Wow. And once he sees this, it becomes clear to him that that first set of thoughts, which are engaging but leave him empty, that's not where God's leading. The other is. And that's the origin of his whole teaching on discernment. By paying attention to what's going on in our hearts and the related thoughts, we can see where God is and where God's leading. Wow. Yeah. Well, the reason why this speaks so much to people is because Ignatius is not adding anything to the spiritual life. We're all going through these attractions and resistances on the level of the heart. Thoughts, should I do this? Maybe I may just, all of this is going on. But we don't have a way to understand it. We don't even have a vocabulary for it. So when Ignatius steps in there and says, look, this is what's been happening, and this is how you can know what's of God and not of God, and this is what you should do and shouldn't do in that situation, it's a liberation for people because, oh, that's what's been going on. Now I see it.
Dang, this test is hard. What is the answer to this one? Seems like he knows. Maybe I could just look at what he's writing. This seems like something to discern.
Hi, I'm Danny Gustafson.
I'm Brian Strasberger, and we're with the Jesuit Post.
Today on Ask Iggy, we're talking about discernment.
Discernment has to do with decision-making, but it goes beyond every little decision in our day-to-day life. This is about bringing God into the picture for higher stakes choices.
And discernment is not about trying to choose between the good and the bad. That should be obvious. Choose the good. So if your options are to cheat or not to cheat, Brian, don't cheat. Discernment's really about how do we choose between the good and the good.
Okay, so it's less, should I peek at the answers on the test of the person sitting next to me? And more, should I stay with my pre-med biology major or switch to theology?
That's a great example, because the truth is, those are both good choices, and the answer won't be the same for everyone.
I hear that St. Ignatius talks about consolation and desolation. What is that all about? Huh? I didn't catch that.
He said, I call consolation when some interior movement in the soul is caused, through which the soul comes to be inflamed with love of its Creator and Lord.
Wait, what does that mean?
What Ignatius is saying here is that when we're discerning, we need to be attentive to feelings of peace and the things that help us grow in faith, hope, and love. Do you know that feeling you get of peace when you make a really good decision? This is what it's like to be in consolation.
Gotcha. So what about desolation then?
Well, Ignatius says it's when you feel empty, hopeless, and restless. Basically, it's the exact opposite of what you feel when you're in consolation. So if you're thinking about being a pre-med major and you start to get stressed and anxious just at the thought of it, be attentive to that feeling.
All right, I think I've got it now. You're saying that when I'm happy, that means I'm in consolation, and when I'm sad, that means I'm in desolation, right?
No, not exactly. Consolation and desolation are deeper than surface level emotions. What it means is that if you're feeling consoled, that is probably the option God is calling you to. And if thinking about another option leaves you in desolation, that's probably not what God has in mind for you.
Okay, so consolation is not the feeling I get when Journey's Don't Stop Believin' comes on the radio.
Iggy also reminds us to pay attention to the state we're in when making a discernment. He said that when you're in desolation, don't make any big decisions. That is to say, if you're feeling distant from God, that is not the best time to be picking a major or changing jobs.
That makes sense. This reminds me of the suggestions that Ignatius gives for making a tough discernment. Because many times when we're making a decision, we keep going back and forth between two good options. We can feel excited about both, but we know we can't do them both.
Exactly. Ignatius offers 3 very concrete ways to help you reach a decision. First, you can list the pros and cons of each option. As you're making the list, it might become clear that you feel more drawn to one of the options.
Another technique is to imagine what advice you would give to someone else making the same decision. It's often easier to tell someone else what to do than to make a decision for yourself.
The last technique will sound a little grim. Ignatius tells us to consider our decision from the perspective we'll have on our deathbed. Looking back on your life years later, which decision will you wish you had made?
We got to think about dying just to make a discernment?
That's not really the point. The idea is to benefit from the perspective you'll have when looking back in time, as opposed to looking ahead to the uncertainty of the future.
Once you've gone through the process and discerned your decision, it's a great idea to pray for confirmation. If you feel God's consolation in the ensuing days, that's a sure sign of a good discernment.
And remember, you're discerning among goods. There is no wrong choice here. You're working with good options. So trust your discernment process, let go of any lingering doubts, and know that God will always be with you.
Hi, my name's Father Mike Schmitz, and this is Ascension Presents. So when it comes to making decisions, I think a lot of times we have a lot of anxiety. Many people have a lot of anxiety when it comes to having to decide, especially the big choices, the big decisions. And so a lot of times what we end up doing is saying, well, just God, you tell me what to do. Now, that's not a bad thing. That's a really good thing, because it's saying, actually, I want your will, God, more than I want my God. So my will, God, so you just tell me what to do. When it comes to where should I go to college, when it comes to who should I marry, or should I go to the seminary or the convent, or all these kinds of things. God, you just tell me and I'll do it. That's not a bad thing. It's a really good thing to say, what I want to do, God, is your will. That's why we pray, thy will be done. It's kind of core to being a saint. The saint is the person who says, God, thy will be done. And the one in hell is the one to whom God says, your will be done. That's from C.S. Lewis. I paraphrase that. I remember reading I read a book once, and it said that the author wrote, and he said, when it comes to trying to figure out God's will in our lives, a lot of times we don't necessarily want to do God's will as much as we want the relief from the responsibility of having to make a decision for ourselves. Because a lot of times what God is counting on us to do is making the decision ourselves. Unless God has actually stepped out and said, this is what I want you to do, then, and it seems like a lot of ways, he says, okay, just choose. God has given us so much freedom. He's blessed us with so much. He's given us wisdom and intellect. He's given us a will, and he wants us to use the intellect, and he wants us to use the will when it comes to a big decision. So how do we do that? First, if God has revealed something, it's already revealed, right? So it's like, hey, should I cheat on my wife or not? No, he said don't do that, so don't do that. You know what I'm saying? Because that's clear enough. Or if God has placed a truth, like a conviction on your heart when it comes to like, should I go to the seminary? But if he hasn't said either clearly don't do this or clearly do this, you have to ask 4 questions. I like to look at these as like 4 doors. And the first thing is, or it's actually the same door, but you're asking this a different 4 questions about the same door. The first question is this a good door? Like this decision I have to make, is this a good door? Is this something that God has said, never go down, never open this door, it's not good? Or is it a bad door? So if it's a good door or even a neutral door, then it's a possibility. If it's a bad door, then the door is off limits, it's locked, I don't need to go in there. Actually, that's the second question, is not only is this a good door, is this an open door? Is this an actual thing I could do? Is this a possibility or a reality for me? For example, I don't have to discern whether I should apply, try out for the NBA or not. Like that for me is a closed door. I don't have to, it's a good, fine door, neutral at least, but I don't have to like bang against this door because it is closed to me. Same kind of thing when it comes to if someone were to say, I applied to the seminary. I thought this was a good door. It is a good door. And I applied and they said that I was declined from the seminary. Like, okay, that means that at least right now, it's a closed door. I don't have to continue to ask or bang against this door. So is it a good door? Is it an open door? Third question, is this a wise door? Now, this is where things get a little more complicated. You have to start using your brain. And that brain has to ask the question, okay, so knowing where I've been, knowing who I am right now, and also knowing who I want to be, who I believe God is calling me to be, would this be a wise door for me to open? Would this be a wise door for me to walk through? Would this be a wise decision in my life? Because you know you, right? Like you know the kind of person you are. You also know who you are. You know your struggles. You know your strengths. You also know the kind of person you want to be. So knowing all those things, would this be a wise door for you to walk down, to open up, to enter, to pass through, to decide? Because a lot of times people say, well, no, I just have to kind of sort of have to choose this. Not necessarily. Is this a good door? Is this an open door? Is this a wise door? Would this be good for you to go down? Think about a relationship. You might already know enough about this person to know that it would not be a good idea for you to pursue a relationship with them. Yeah, maybe it's good. Maybe it's open, like they're interested, but it wouldn't be wise, right? It wouldn't actually get you to where you want to go. It wouldn't necessarily help them get to where they want to go. Is this a wise door? And the fourth question, and this is the one that people hate when I bring up, but it's a real question. Not only is this a good door, is this an open door, is this a wise door, but the big question is, if it is all those things, is this a door that I want? Because if God has not revealed yet that like he's either said, no, don't go through this door, or yes, please, absolutely go through this door, you actually get to choose. Is this the door I actually want to go down or go through? Is this a decision I want to make? So God has given us so much freedom to use our minds, to use our wills. I believe a lot of times he even opens up and says, no, any of these choices you can make, I will be there on the other side. I think this is what, when it comes down to like, should I marry this person or that person? Okay, well, is this good, open, wise, and a door you want? Is this a person you'd like to marry? Or about that person? Well, who do you want? Should I date this person, that person? Well, who do you want? Should I go to this school or that school? Which one do you want to go to? Should I major in this or in that? Okay, all your majors, are they good? Are they open, available to you? Are they wise, knowing yourself? And which one is the one you want to do? Because we can't just keep dismissing and putting this off on God. We have to actually make decisions and take responsibility. One of the marks of adulthood, as I said in another video, one of the marks of adulthood is taking responsibility for oneself, for one's decisions. So when you have to make a decision to go to this college or that, to take this major or that, to date this person or that, to go to seminary or not, all these kind of things, take responsibility. And even if you make the wrong decision after asking all those questions, the Lord still will be with you. And he always provides a way to get back on track. Hold on.
Brandon, it's not a morbid thing at all. Getting in touch with your sinfulness is a great form of prayer. If I, before the Lord, confess, there's the formal sacrament of reconciliation, but just the confession of sin in the presence of the Lord, that's a good prayerful practice. And it's not shouldn't depress you. It's in front of the Lord who loves you more than you love yourself, and to say, help me deal with, Lord, this issue. You know, in Ignatius of Loyola, you've got the consciousness examen at the end of the day. It's when you kind of review your day in light of God. All the great things happen to you, the opportunities, the graces, but also all the things that blocked you. Today I had the opportunity, Lord, to do this work of charity, but I didn't do it. Today, Lord, I allowed that person just to bug me, and I didn't reach out in forgiveness and love. I had this chance, which I, missed. Good. Don't feel, that you're falling into the slough of despond. I mean, you're confessing in the presence of the Lord. Those are all forms of Lenten prayer, it seems to me. Well, one of the practices is to fast, purposely to set aside some of these sensual pleasures, so as to allow the deeper hungers to emerge. Please, it has nothing to do with Puritanism or Platonism or dualism. It doesn't mean that we hate pleasure. That's a caricature. I mean, maybe some Christian expressions have fallen into that. But that's a caricature. Christians love the world because God made it good. We love food and drink and sensual pleasure. But they can become so dominant that we forget the deepest longing of the heart. And so we fast so as to allow that hunger to emerge. There's something mysterious too, Brandon, isn't there? It goes right back to the Bible itself, and it comes up through the tradition, that something about fasting accomplishes certain spiritual ends. And I can't explain that exactly. But Jesus' famous line about, this type of demon only comes out through prayer and fasting. And I've talked to a number of really spiritually alert people that I've known, and they'll say that. They'll say, oh yeah, fasting. If you want to accomplish that, you've got to fast. Now, why that works, I don't entirely know. But there's a lot of spiritual power to it. See, prayer is meant to give rise to charity, ultimately. Fasting is meant to give rise to charity because it links me more deeply to God, who is caritas, who is love. So almsgiving, in some ways, that's what it's all about. It also, I think, really heightens our sense of solidarity within the mystical body, that we're connected to each other. We cannot say someone who's suffering, that's their problem. I'm not going to worry about it. It's not my problem. No, it's our problem. It's our problem. Certainly all we who are baptized, but Aquinas speaks even of, the virtual mystical body, that everyone in principle is meant to be part of the mystical body. And so anyone, anywhere who's suffering is brother and sister to me. And almsgiving signals that, in a very vivid way. Those are good, but think of so many ways. Let's say you typically tip 15% at a restaurant, or 20%. How about in Lent up at 5%? It's as a form of almsgiving. Tip your waiter or waitress a little more than you usually do. How about during Lent? I realize this might get you on every mailing list in America, but you just make a resolution that any time during Lent, some solicitation for money comes from a charity, give something. You're not going to ask any questions. You're just going to say, okay, I abandon myself to God's providence, and God will send me places that need my help. Give something. Put a poor box in your house for Lent, especially like you've got all your kids, Brandon, people with big families. Whenever anyone leaves the house, they have to put something in the poor box. And it could be a little bit, could be a dime, it could be $1, whatever. But how about for those 40 days, every time you leave the house, you're going to put something in the poor box to remind you of those in the world who are in great need. One that I've recommended over the years, and I challenge myself because I'm not very good at following this, but when you're buying something during Lent, whether you're buying a car, you're buying a suit of clothes, you're buying a TV set, or you're buying, groceries, find the item that you really want and could afford, but on purpose buy the next level down, the one that's less expensive, and give the difference to the poor. So let's say make it, we'll give a grand example. I'm buying a car, and here's the car I want, and I could afford it. All right, on purpose, get the next one down, but give the difference to the poor. There's that TV set I really want. I want that giant TV set, and I could afford that. Buy a smaller one. Give the difference to the poor. All kinds of ways, and be creative. One thing I recommend too, during Lent, make sure you've got loose dollar bills and all that in your pocket, so that when someone you see on the street is asking for money, maybe especially during Lent, you say, I'm not going to ask any questions. I'm not going to have any hesitation. I'm just going to give something. Just get an almsgiving mentality in mind all during those 40 days.